What's up, Who Dat Nation? Christmas Vogel and John Hendricks here from Boot Crew Media. Saints Buccaneers Monday night. We have the pregame coverage for you guys here, right here. So make sure to subscribe as always. John, let's just jump right into this one. Two big names who have been out for the last couple of weeks, actually a couple of months for the Saints, and Marshawn Lattimore, and then a couple of weeks in Pete Werner. Both limited throughout the week in practice, listed as questionable. What are you kind of thinking in terms of their availability for this Monday night?
Yeah, I'll be surprised even if either are active. I don't think they're either going to play or any type of prominent role. I think the plan is to still stick with Cade and Ellis, and Zach Bond's been getting some more looks too. So him and Demario for sure, Ellis and Demario. And as far as the secondary goes, I believe the plan is to have Paulson and Alante Taylor on the outside and Bradley Roby in the slot. So very interesting seeing practice on Friday during those walkthroughs. Those are usually indications. So that's kind of where is this coming from? At practice Friday, we usually see who's going to be in the lineup, and Marshawn was not in the starters. Neither was Pete Werner. And again, they're progressing, but maybe you're thinking you can get by with everything that you have to kind of make a run and get healthy. But for me, if Marshawn, everything I understand, he wants to play in this game, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like they're going there. Going to be one of the more interesting things because the season's on the line. You don't have any more chances after this.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I was going to say, on one side of the argument, you could be like, well, bye week's just around the corner. They get an extra 2 weeks of rest, and then you know that they're ready to go, maybe no limitations when they come back. But to your point, if you do lose this game, and I'm going to ask you about it in a little bit, because I think this is the type of game where we can kind of get closure on this Saints season. But if you do lose this game, then I think it's a fair argument to say, okay, 4 games left, serious injuries or whatever. What's the determination to come back if the season seems lost? But before we do that, on the flip side of things, looking at the Buccaneers, they're pretty banged up too. These are probably two of the longer injury reports we've seen for both teams this season, and for the Bucs. Big one off the gate is just not having Tristan Wirfs. He's been such a good right tackle for them since they drafted him a couple of years ago. So he's out, got injured in the Browns game. But it's not just that. They're two starting safeties. I was listening to Sarah Walsh earlier today. She was saying the expectation is Antoine Winfield Jr. doesn't play, so that takes one out of it. But they also have to worry about their other safety in Edwards and whether he's going to play. He's listed as doubtful. If I take those two injuries into account and also taking Wirfs' injury into account, you look at this. What do you think's kind of the bigger deal there? Not having your starting right tackle, who's been just an absolute pro since he got to the league, or the two safeties? Because if you look back at last time the Saints played, there were some opportunities there for Chris Olave to go deep.
Yeah, look, for me, I think right now the bigger emphasis is the offensive line with not having Wirfs. Now, I saw Logan Ryan got called up, veteran guy. He's going to be able to insert, so that kind of gives you a good indication there. But this really comes down to after last week. The Saints offense. We got to find out, can they even move the football? Can they put the points up on the board? Can they capitalize? I mean, I think that's the biggest thing here. And again, I think I've said it plenty of times. I feel like first to 20 is going to win. I picked the Saints without going too deep into it. I think they can win this game, put up 24 points. I think their offense is going to move the ball better and finish better. But for me, I think the defense has been ascending and playing extremely well. You don't give Brady the time he needs. I mean, Tampa's gone through a lot of patchwork on the offensive line. Look, they can fool you in a lot of different ways, whether it's in the interior, the outside, or just send those guys in the middle with DeMario and obviously Cade and Ellis. I think it's going to be a little bit tougher challenge for Brady. And especially, I saw Leonard Fournette's supposed to be playing. I don't know how much of a run game they're going to have, but this could be a hard ask for the Tampa offense. So it's going to give New Orleans some opportunities on offense. I mean, they're not playing against a defense like the 49ers last week. I mean, this is, again, banged up teams. The Saints have got to capitalize. I feel good about them being able to move the football today or tonight, but can they finish and put points up on the board? That's the biggest thing after getting blanked last week. I think that's really the biggest thing for me. I think the back end, if Dalton doesn't have enough time to throw or if he doesn't see it, it doesn't mean much to the Saints. But, I think the bigger emphasis is Brady and the way he operates. It's surgical type approach like we've seen over the years. He needs his right tackle, but he's not going to have him. That's really going to be a hard ask for this Bucs offensive line tonight.
Yeah, so you mentioned that. Now that kind of brings me to my next point. You talked about not having the right tackle there, and you also mentioned Fournette. Last time around the Saints played, Fournette had 2.7 yards per carry, so they did a really good job of making them one-dimensional, which the Saints have really done the last couple of times they played the Bucs, which has kind of gone into why they've been so successful. Make them one-dimensional, then hit home with your front four. You talked about not having the right tackle, but also paired with the fact that people would say whatever they want about the Saints. What you cannot deny is the last 2 weeks, the defense, I think, has looked on par with what we saw the last couple of years, which is great news. Do you feel like this is the moment for them to kind of have one of those games where you said first to 20? I actually, a couple of moments ago, was talking about the game on the radio, and I was saying, look, I kind of think if the Saints win this, I know it sounds ugly, but 17-13 can roll with me. Like, do you think this is an opportunity here where the defense could have another great game? You talk about the Niners game. Yeah, they didn't score. That's awful. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they also held them to 13 points, and that offense has just as many weapons as any other unit in the league.
Yeah, look, I mean, hopefully, I don't care what the score is as long as they win, because this is put up or shut up, do or die, however you want to call that. But look, I think this even goes to even the Marshawn thing, that look, they're riding a hot hand because look, Paulson Adebo's playing excellent. He would have been the starter opposite of Lattimore, but I think Taylor's been playing pretty well. He's a rookie who's been kind of, I don't want to say thrown into the fire, but I think he's done a pretty good job. He's learned from his mistakes. Is playing with a ton of confidence. I don't know, to quote Dennis Allen, upsetting the apple cart. I know you want to have Lattimore in there, but if Lattimore is not completely 100%, I get it why they might look at saying Taylor and Adebo would be the guys on the outside. But for me, I think this defense is playing extremely well. Look, the reason they lost to the 49ers was not because of the Saints defense. The defense did everything they needed to. They shut the doors on 4th and goal. They had were on the wrong side of some penalty calls, bad officiating overall last week. Olave got one taken away, and then obviously Taylor got his pick taken away because of an egregious holding call on Chris Harris Jr. So, look, I feel good about this Saints defense where they're at. Heating up at the right time. The problem is it isn't too little, too late. And I feel good about them in this matchup. You get to the bye week, you can get healthier, but they're going to have an interesting problem on their hands when they do get healthy. Is where do you can't just sit a guy like Caden Ellis if Pete Warner's healthy. You can't sit Pete Warner. Those both those guys are really good. And then obviously Lattimore's your top corner. So it's going to be an interesting conundrum, and hopefully the ship just holds together, because if they can get out tonight, escape with a win, then things really change in the complexity of the NFC South. They go from last to second in the division, and Atlanta lost yesterday. And look ahead to next week. San Francisco, even though they were without Jimmy Garoppolo, they still beat the Dolphins. And so Tampa is not going to go roll in there, even with them rolling with a Mr. Irrelevant quarterback. I mean, this is falling in the Saints' lap, and it's done this plenty of times. I've lived through the 2014 to 2016 years. I've lived through the 7-9 in 2012. I've been through all those things where the Saints are in a position where they just have to take care of business. And the 60 minutes tonight is going to decide whether this team is serious about that or they've already packed it in.
Yeah, and to kind of further your point, you mentioned the Bucs play the 49ers next week. The game after that's against the Bengals, so it doesn't get any easier for them. So to your point, like it does open up, and we'll see if they can take advantage. And I'll have one more point on that in just a minute. I want to talk about Alvin Kamara real quick. I'd say about Alvin, the one thing he's done so well this year is if it's a game where he doesn't play well, or let's say just a team in general, he's the guy that steps up to the microphone. He's kind of really taken on a way bigger leadership role than he ever has had in New Orleans. Rough game against the 49ers. We know the 2 fumbles. How confident are you that, A, he's kind of the focal point early to start off this game, get him engaged, whether it's out in space, maybe get the screen game back? That would be a lovely sight to see. And then B, that he does bounce back. He has that performance, or like, hey, last week was a fluke. It is what it is, but that's just out, put that to the side. Alvin's here to bounce back and do his thing. Where's your confidence level in 41?
Yeah, look, the Bucs. We make a lot about the job the Saints do on Tom Brady, but the Bucs do a really good job scheming against Alvin Kamara. I mean, he doesn't have as much success as you'd think against Tampa. They do a good job of isolating him and taking away some of the things that they like to do, the Saints offense, that is. So, look, I think he can have a decent impact on the game tonight. But are you asking if he would have 100 yards rushing, or I don't know if he'll get to 100 total? I would love to see it, but rushing, receiving, that might be a tough task just the way Tampa plays against Alvin Kamara. But get him some touches early, get him in the rhythm, lean on him a little bit. Again, I think this is a prime opportunity for guys like Taysom Hill, Chris Olave to step up. Jarvis Landry, I think, is the guy that is quietly could have a really good game and a big impact tonight. And then obviously you look at the tight end spot, they're not going to have Juwan Johnson, So you really only have Taysom Hill presumably there, but it's Adam Troutman who had a pretty good game against them last year, and his guy that can have some success for you. And I would expect him to call up Lucas Kroll from the practice squad. He's a guy that saw on Friday that was doing some red zone work with the team. I don't know how much of an impact and how many snaps he'll get because obviously you want to be a blocker first, but they're going to have to find a way with some of these weapons. But Kamara, look, I think the Bucs have done a good job holding him in check, so I don't expect him to have this big bounce back, surreal, unreal game type thing. But I expect him to make some big impacts. Just get him some positive plays. That's all you can hope for.
Yeah, look, if you told me, hey, he's gonna have 4 catches, 50 yards, leave the rushing to the side, I'd sign up for that from the heartbeat. I would take it,
I take
especially
that.
with the way because you mentioned the Bucs do such a good job against him, and it's kind of been that for years. The red zone. I would say this about the Saints. You look at that 49ers game, especially in the second half, they were living in San Francisco territory, but they just couldn't get it done in the red zone. You have the missed field goal with Will Lutz from 48. You have the 2 opportunities where they get stuffed on the 4th down with the sack, and then they have the Alvin Kamara fumble. What is the fix to the red zone woes? Is it as simple as, hey, the fumble's a miscue, there was the Jawan Johnson drop, the Taysom Hill drop? Is it more execution or is it play calling? Is it a mixture of both? Because I think for the Saints, everyone's so quick to kind of point the finger at Carmichael, whatever. My argument would be, I do think the Saints actually move the ball decently well this year in the red zone, though. We've seen it. We saw it with the Bengals game. We see it with the 49ers game. Where are you at for this? Because like you said, this could be a defensive battle.
Yeah, so here's where I have a problem. So, like, obviously, these have been some really hard games to sit through, but I distinctly remember the one that they went to Taysom Hill on that 3rd down. That was a play where Jarvis Landry was in the huddle pre snap. They subbed Jarvis out and put Taysom Hill in. And so the thing is, if he catches it, it works great. But I have a tough time taking a veteran guy like that out and then dialing up something for Taysom, and then Taysom can't deliver, right? I mean, that's just the thing. It's like those are the maddening parts of things for me because Jarvis is a veteran in this league. You can feed him the ball, you can get him some looks, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is that I think the onus falls on Pete a lot because of substitution. And again, he kind of in so many words said it this week. He sucked last week when it came to that, and they're just going to have to be better. And so I think it's execution, taking what you can get. Because look, Dalton's not inept. He had Alvin Kamara wide open in the flats on one of the plays too, and so again, it's part of what you call. It's part of the execution, the timing. Obviously you can't take sacks down there. You can't, do those types of things. You can't turn the football over. They're just going to have to come up with a more creative style to attack. And look, I think, without getting too much ahead of ourselves, but I don't know if the Pete Carmichael experiment is going to work after this year, right? Because you got to be able to capitalize on these drives. There's a lot of questions to answer for the Saints team going to the season or next season, regardless of how things finish out. So, look, I think that, rubber meets the road. I think they can move the football, no problem. It's the red zone execution. And again, if they can't, just put the points up on the board through special teams because Lutz has kind of been off and on this year. All special teams has really been off and on this year. Gillikin struggled early after having some pretty good moments in training camp and preseason. He came back, in a big way. This is the time where everybody that you pay and you expect to deliver has got to deliver for you in a must-win game tonight.
So you talked about, hey, they might have to make these changes in the offseason, win or lose. Brings us to our last point here. You talked about what a win would do, right? Because all of a sudden you go into the bye week. In terms of win column, you're tied with the Bucs and Falcons. Everything kind of feels like it's still there for the taking, especially with games left against the Falcons and Panthers. I look at the flip side. Let's say they do end up falling short in this game. Is it wrong to say that's it, season's over, you're starting the clock for the offseason? Because I know it seems like such a blunt way of looking at it, especially because it's only December 5th, but I feel like that's a fair assessment. If they lose this game, you lose both tiebreakers against the Bucs. You really put yourself in a hole now because you're 2 games back to begin with, not mentioning the fact that you've been swept by that team. Is that a fair assessment for this one? If you lose this game, no more talking about, hey, this NFC South is bad and for the taking. You've lost that really the right to say you're competing for that spot.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Yeah, you do have Atlanta, you do have Carolina, but you still also have Cleveland on the schedule, who looked like a dumpster fire yesterday, but their defense looks good. And you still have Philly. Now, I don't think they're going to beat Philly unless Philly's a team that's going to be, resting all their starters because they've locked up the first seed. And so, look, I felt it in Pittsburgh. I kind of felt it a little bit last week, but especially Pittsburgh, is like, if you can't beat this team, you don't belong, right? If you can't beat the Bucs with everything that you've been talking, I think it's over, right? And I don't care if it's mathematically you say they're still alive or there's a chance or all that Lloyd Christmas stuff from Dumb and Dumber, but I think they lose tonight. That's it. I mean, I don't have a confidence level that they can say, well, they can put together a run and get there at the end. I mean, they're out of chances. We've been talking about this for weeks, and this team has just not been able to live up to expectations. So, look, I mean, obviously you're going to compete because there's still a lot of things at stake. You still have to worry about, guys that you might keep next year, or what you're going to do with some of these contracts. There's a lot of things that go into it. And so, and you're scouting for next year's too. And I think that, I mentioned it, and maybe last week we talked, but if Dennis Allen, I think, is going to get a second chance here. But if he loses out for the rest of the season, I don't think there's any way they can justify it. He has to get to at least 7-10. I think maybe 6-11, they can make a argument to keep him. But if he can't get to at least 6-11, there's no way you can justify keeping a guy like that around.
Yeah, that's a very fair number. That's kind of the number I've been talking about with people too. I feel like, 6-11, it's not our decision to make, but I feel like for the Saints, they can pass it off. It's tough if this is a 5-win or 4-win would be the nightmare scenario, obviously, for the Saints. Last thing before we go, John, in terms of optimism, don't want to leave people hanging on us basically talking about, hey, turn off the lights. But you're going into this game. I've already said it. I feel like this is and we've said this for weeks, but I feel like this is a very winnable game, obviously. You probably concur with that, right?
I do. I picked the Saints. I have a good feeling about tonight. I think they can win 24-20 is what I'm thinking. That's what's been popping up in my head. Again, the Saints offense getting 24 points. I don't know if it's Saints offense and maybe the defense helps them out, but I feel like this is the opportunity they've been given, that they're riding. It's been, I don't know how many more humbling experiences you can have, but not putting a single point up on the board last week and the defense playing the way it is, you don't need a ton of chances. You just need to convert some of these chances. And so I feel like this comes down to coaching. And again, you're going to see what Dennis Allen is really made of, because in these situations, this is what he gets paid to do. And so this is a game where I feel like his coaching can make the biggest difference here. And we'll see if he's built for this moment, right? And so I'm picking the Saints 24-20. I think they can win and at least keep us interested for another 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I'm with you. My score, I'm thinking a little different. I'm thinking a little bit more defensive, around 17-13, but I feel good.
I like
that could be a bad thing. We'll see what happens if we're feeling confident, but we'll see. But we'll, 8:15 p.m. kickoff around there for Saints Bucs, ESPN for people who want to watch at home. Should be a good one. If they win, season stays alive. We get to talk about meaningful football in December. If not, well, going to be some dark times for a lot of us, but we'll see what happens. Saints Bucs Monday night. Let's go get a W.